We on?
Good.
Good deal. So, this chapter is about the cell membrane and membrane transport. And we're going to do a big old lab coming up here soon on membrane transport. That should be exciting. Did you guys do the potato lab in 9th grade? Where we measured the molarity of the potato?
Yeah.
I think we did like a turnip or something.
No, that's the enzyme one.
Oh.
Turnip was the enzyme one. Just trying to think of what we could do. I'll figure something out. There's a lot of labs we can do with this. So, first of all, we need to know the structure of the membrane. The cell membrane is a phospholipid bilayer. It's made, give myself some room here, made of fat molecules. Y'all remember the parts of a fat? What is that called?
Glycerol.
Yeah, glycerol. And what are these connected to it?
Fatty acid chain.
Fatty acid chains. That's pretty much a normal fat right there. It's called a triglyceride. Isn't that a good name? 3 fatty acid chains. Now let's change that thing around a bit. Let's put a unsaturated fatty acid on it. Let's put a phosphate group. Let's put a nitrate group, also called a choline group. And there we have the structure of a phospholipid. Hopefully you learned about this a few chapters ago. Now, some of the things you need to know about a phospholipid. This part up here at the top, I love drawing these things. What's the name of these things?
Right.
This is our polar what we call the polar head portion. It's like if this were a body, those would be the legs and that would be the head, I guess. Why do we call it polar?
Because it is hydrophilic. Charged.
What's that mean?
It likes water.
It's charged. Yeah, it's charged. If you look closely enough at these magnets, the N has a positive charge next to it. The P has a negative charge. And so this is it is hydrophilic, which means it loves water. And these fatty acid tails, this is the nonpolar tails, and they're hydrophobic. They're water-fearing. They aren't charged. And if the molecule is not charged, it will not be attracted to water. If you ever pour oil and water, mix them together, the oil will sit right on top and the water will sit below and they won't mix. You ever notice that? Maybe when you put salad dressing on something, I don't know. So fats are normally nonpolar, but when you add on the phosphate and the choline, then this part becomes polar and that part becomes nonpolar. And what it'll make it do, when you put it in water, and by the way, all living cells are pretty much surrounded by water, even all the ones in your body. If it's not surrounded by water, it's probably dead. Did you know that? Your skin here is touching the air. All those cells are dead. The cells down deep are alive. They're surrounded by water. There's water on the inside of your body. So when you put these together, what they're going to do, put another one, they'll kind of line up up side by side like this. And one thing that happens, because one of the fatty acids tails is unsaturated, it's got a little kink in it, these things won't get too close together. If all the fatty acid tails were straight, they would get real close together, and the membrane wouldn't be permeable enough. But having fatty acids that are kind of kinked out like that causes them to spread out enough to make the membrane a little bit permeable. We call it semi-permeable. Have you ever heard that before? A semi-permeable membrane. Small molecules can squeeze between them. Big molecules cannot. And you will have other phospholipids underneath them, but they form in the opposite direction. Oh, I need another. Another yellow. No, that's not one. There's one. Bam. So they'll take on this arrangement here, where you got a layer on the top and a layer on the bottom. The bottom layer here is upside down, so that the non-polar tails face one another. You got water outside the cell, you got water inside the cell. So the only place these things can go to get away from water is to kind of huddle together. That's why it's what we call a bilayer, 2 layers. So they've drawn it a lot more detailed here. You can see a layer of phospholipids on the top, a layer of phospholipids on the bottom. Every cell has this. And look at how many of them it takes to make up the cell membrane. There's a lot of molecules there. What do y'all think? Are y'all impressed?
I am.
Now, there's some other molecules here in the membrane you have to know. The first one that kind of jumps out at you are all these blue things. The blue things are proteins. Proteins fit in the membrane. And when I say proteins, I'm talking about these things. Chains of amino acids folded into a shape. And they can be big. And depending on their shape, they do different things. If they're shaped like this, they're hollow in the middle, that's called a channel protein. It can let stuff in and out of the cell. It can let bigger molecules through. Some membranes have big channel proteins to let larger molecules through. Sometimes the protein has a specific shape where it only lets a certain type of molecule through. Maybe glucose. There are special proteins that have a shape, just the perfect shape to capture glucose. And when glucose is captured, they change their shape and let it in. And then they go back to the shape they originally were. Isn't that cool? There's proteins with just the right shape where glucose hits it, and it captures the glucose, and it changes shape to let it through the cell. And then it goes back to what it was before. Isn't that specific? We call that a carrier protein. Carries molecules through the membrane. And there's carrier proteins that have the perfect shape for every molecule the cell needs. Isn't that cool? This is how viruses trick their way into cells. how's the COVID virus get in one of your cells? It's shaped in such a way that it tricks the cell where it can grab one of the proteins on the cell surface, will attach to it and pull it in. And it's not the molecule you need, it's the COVID virus. Isn't that tricky?
Mm-hmm.
That's not nice. That's not very catchable.
So how do you combat that? Well, you could come up with a blocker for that receptor. Here's the receptor that lets the COVID virus in. You can come up with something that can block it. Now the COVID virus can't get in.
That
But
video is
can't the
very
other thing
satisfying.
can't get in?
What's that?
The thing that you need can't get in now?
That's the side effect. Have you ever heard drugs have side effects? That's
Yeah.
why they have side effects, because everything that's on a cell you need. So what happens is if you block the receptor, then you aren't getting the molecule that the cell needs.
Well, that's
So you'll have side effects. Maybe you won't get COVID, but you'll suffer from
Headaches.
Drowsiness.
not having enough sugar metabolism or something like that. So there's always drugs always have side effects. Isn't this interesting stuff? Y'all are learning, see?
I started
That's
watching
what
that
happens
video.
in school.
the video from yesterday?
No, that video about the receptor binding is really satisfying.
Oh, on the thing when it came up and
The animation.
Yeah, that was good. What else do we have? Now, sometimes the protein goes all the way through the membrane. We call that an integral protein. And sometimes the protein is just on the surface. We call that a peripheral protein. This protein just sits on the inside of the cell. And maybe this protein, I don't know, one of these proteins just sit on the outside of the cell. Maybe that one right there just sits on the outside. So some proteins are just on one side. Usually those proteins are enzymes. You know what an enzyme is? It's a protein that does something, takes something apart or puts something together. Well, often those enzymes are embedded in the membrane, and a molecule might come up and bump against it, and then it might change that molecule to something else. And sometimes on the outside, like this one right here, this has a carbohydrate chain attached to it. This is called a glycoprotein, and you see that thing sticking off there? That's a carbohydrate chain. What do I mean when I say a carbohydrate chain? It's many of these things hooked together in a long chain. Y'all remember carbohydrate chains, right? I got a few more of these. Just stick a few more of these on here. Here's a carbohydrate chain. Every cell you have has carbohydrate chains hanging off of it. They have a certain shape, and that helps identify the cell to your white blood cells. And it says, oh, this is one of Mr. Willis's cells. I won't mess with that.
They live dangerously.
What's that?
They live dangerously.
They did. You can get mutations where cells grow the wrong shaped carbohydrate chain, and then your white blood cells will attack your own cells. That's called an autoimmune disorder. Have you ever heard of that? It's really bad because there's not a whole lot that can be done for them. What you can do is you can take drugs that stop your whole immune system from working.
That sounds not.
That sounds rough, doesn't it? Now you can't fight off other diseases very well. But at least your cells won't attack your own white blood cells won't attack your own cells that way. It's tough. It's tough trying to figure out ways to deal with all these diseases and viruses.
Isn't there like a virus that like makes your white blood cells attack your red blood cells?
Malaria does that. That's not a virus. That's a protist. No, it doesn't make your white blood cells attack your red blood cells. It just attacks your red blood cells. Malaria does. I don't know about your white blood cells attacking your red blood cells.
That'd be bad.
There might be. I don't know all the diseases. I'm no epidemiologist. What about cholesterol? You need to know about cholesterol. Cholesterol is a molecule. Kind of looks like this. It's got several hexagons, and it sits in the membrane. It's a fat. It's got a single tail, and basically kind of looks like this. Kind of looks like that, with a fatty acid tail. That's a little bit like the structure of cholesterol. Not very good, but anyway, it sits in the membrane, and why is it there? Well, it helps stabilize the membrane. If it gets real hot, what happens to the molecules when it gets real hot?
Starts moving fast.
They start moving real fast, right? If it gets real hot, the membrane would start moving real fast and kind of fly apart. The cholesterol keeps it from doing that.
Why wouldn't you want high
Stabilizes
cholesterol?
it at high temperatures.
Why wouldn't you want high cholesterol?
Well, having too much cholesterol is also a problem. Because the cholesterol isn't needed, your extra cholesterol isn't used by your cells. And so it gets stored in your body. As it's a fat molecule, so you can build up fat on the walls of your arteries, and then it causes high blood pressure.
Okay.
So you don't want more than is necessary. So high cholesterol is also a problem. Also, at low temperatures, molecules slow down and stop moving, and the membrane would become too rigid at low temperatures. But cholesterol keeps it from becoming too rigid. So cholesterol is good for your membrane. We say it stabilizes the membrane. Now, here's the interesting thing. Cholesterol only exists at high levels in animal cells. Plant cells hardly have any cholesterol. Do you know why? Why would a plant cell not need cholesterol? Josie, you had your hand up. It's got a cell wall. If you have a cell wall, you don't need cholesterol to stabilize your membrane as much. So, if you have high cholesterol, which you guys are pretty active, you probably don't. But when you get my age, you go to the doctor, they do a blood test, they're like, your cholesterol's too high. Well, that's probably because, in part, you're eating a lot of animal products. Animal cells have lots of cholesterol in their membranes, and so you get a lot of that in your diet. If you want to lower your cholesterol in your diet, what could you do?
No bacon.
Eat plants. If you eat vegetables, they don't have cholesterol in them. So you wouldn't be getting that extra cholesterol that way. Most people who have high animal diets, not most people, but a lot of people can run into cholesterol problems. Your body, though, can, even if you eat only plants, let's say you're a total vegetarian, you never eat animals, your body will also can make cholesterol. Your cells can make cholesterol just from scratch. Matt, you with me? You seem like you weren't. Are you happy about the membrane?
Yeah.
Seem really excited. Doesn't it look like a whole bunch of different things all together?
Mm-hmm.
One scientist once he figured out what the membrane was like, he called it a mosaic. A mosaic means a whole bunch of things put together. Have you ever made one in art? You put a whole bunch of things together and all of a sudden it's something, I don't know, a face or something like that made of a bunch of different things. Well, he also noticed that the molecules in the membrane aren't stuck in one place. They can move around. Like that phospholipid there, a few seconds later might be all the way over here. All of these molecules are moving. If you were to watch this, if you could watch it closely enough, you would see these things bouncing around like a big mosh pit, running into each other and bumping into each other. And every once in a while there's a big protein they bump into. The proteins don't move as fast. And they're all bouncing around everywhere. Wouldn't that be fun? To be one of those? So he called it the fluid mosaic model. Fluid means always moving and always changing. And that's what this thing's like. Those proteins even can move around the structure. And as you saw in the videos the other day, vesicles can come up and become part of the structure. And stuff can be pulled in by the cell and remove part of the membrane. So it's always changing. Fluid mosaic. Isn't that good?
Yeah.
Y'all don't seem too excited. Well, maybe this video will make you more excited. It's a 3D model of the cell membrane. It has no volume. There's no audio.
Can you annotate first?
Oh, what is that? That's a channel protein. Bunch of proteins. Those are phospholipids, supposed to be. That's a protein with carbohydrate chains. Alright, that was fun.
I want to see a damn life of motor protein.
I'm looking it up.
Day in the life of a motor protein?
Yeah, it's one of the recommended videos.
Where do our goes for lunch?
Between the living machinery of the inner cell and the harsh conditions of the outside world stands the cell's plasma membrane. As crucial as this barrier is, it's surprisingly flexible. Push it and watch it move. Poke hard enough and it might break and begin to regroup. The lipid molecules of the membrane naturally assemble in a double layer because their tails repel water as their heads attract it. Throw in some cholesterol and a few carbohydrates, and you have the basic structure of a plasma membrane. Within these lipid molecules, we also find different proteins which do various things for the cell. For instance, they receive signals from the world outside, or they transport nutrients and waste. So nature composes the membrane with a combination or mosaic of different lipids, carbohydrates, and proteins. And these molecules are not stationary. They constantly move within the structure, fluidly changing their positions. The survival of all life rests on this veil of material. A supple membrane, just 2 molecules thick.
Hey, let me ask you a question. This is the kind of thing they'll do on the AP biology exam. What would the membrane look like if you put it in an oil environment instead of in a water environment?
It looks inside out.
These would be facing the oil, and these would be facing each other. Isn't that crazy?
What about when you get oil on your skin?
Well, your skin consists of a whole bunch of dead cells.
Oh, yeah.
And they're filled with a protein called keratin. And they're really stuck together tightly. So it forms a nice barrier. So the oil just wouldn't penetrate. Most stuff you put on your skin can't get through it. It can to a small extent. So there are some medications that you can put on your skin that can penetrate a little bit and get into your blood. But it's a difficult way to get stuff in there. Much easier to just take a pill. Okay, so here's the phospholipid. Can you tell that this is the model I had up here?
Mm-hmm.
Let me ask you this. Where's the nitrate group?
It says R.
The green one?
Yeah, where is it up here?
The R.
The P with the O's, right?
The P, that's the phosphate.
Oh. Yep.
That's this. So that R, I heard somebody saying it. Is that Carter?
Yeah.
The R is the nitrate group. Sometimes it's not a nitrate. There are a bunch of other things that could be up here. But they're usually charged molecules. And there are actually a number of different types of phospholipids in the membrane. That's what a phospholipid looks like, and that's what the cholesterol looks like. The cholesterol also has a hydrophilic portion and a hydrophobic portion. So the cholesterol also associates in the membrane in a certain direction, with the tail going down. I need to get some cholesterol magnets. So if there's only a few lipids, it will take this shape, with just the tails on the inside and the heads on the outside. If you add more though, and get some water to penetrate, then it'll start looking like this. And so this is a small, what we call a lipid sphere, and this is a bigger structure that starts to form a bilayer. Water can penetrate. So if you have enough of these, it'll form a bubble. And we see that forming in that, remember that experiment I showed you where they put the gases in the chamber and they put the electricity on? You get bubbles of these things form just after a few days. You'll see lipid bilayers form inside that chamber when you just started with gases.
Whoa.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
It gives you the idea, wait a sec, maybe this is how cells form. Every cell has this lipid bilayer. It forms readily from ammonia and water and hydrogen. Are we still in this section?
Mm-hmm.
5.1?
We're still on it.
Mm-hmm. This is showing you integral proteins. There's the yellow is the membrane, and you can see the integral proteins kind of go all the way through. You can have, do y'all remember how the proteins would form beta sheets? Remember the alpha helix and the beta sheet? Remember the beta sheet was kind of looking like that? So that could be, very often a little kind of a beta sheet will form. Here's the protein that kind of goes back and forth like that, and that forms an integral protein in the membrane. And here's a couple of beta sheets kind of lying one on top of the other and can go all the way through the membrane like that. You could imagine that this could form in a way where the protein sheet, there's a protein sheet here, and 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 that forms a tube. It's hollow in the middle. And there you got your channel protein. Are y'all imagining this stuff?
Mm-hmm.
This is an HIV virus. And it shows it binding to a receptor protein. It's called the CD4 co-receptor, and it will bind to the HIV virus, and after it binds to the HIV virus, the membrane will swallow it up and let it into the cell. One of the treatments against HIV is to block this CD4 receptor. Then you have the side effects that we were talking about before, but it does help people survive that have HIV. HIV was really the last great viral pandemic before this one. I was about your age when it was going around. It became one of the leading causes of death. Oh, we're about out of time here, aren't we? Tell you what, read 5.1. Could have a quiz on it tomorrow. I'll pick up here tomorrow.